Hello and welcome to this episode of Kennedy Saves the World. Joining me now, one of my very favorite guests to have on this podcast and in life, Benjamin Hall. He has been a Fox News war correspondent and foreign correspondent for years. His book, Saved, is absolute must reading for everyone. I think that's bad English, but I don't think he's going to hold it against me because it should sell books because everyone needs it. If you have someone in your life who's gone through something challenging, get this book for them for Thanksgiving. They will be thankful for their lives for so many reasons. Ben, you are busy working, you are broadcasting, you are documenting, you are writing, you are doing all of it. And your expertise tends to center around the Middle East, as does new conflicts that pop up every few years. This one feels to be particularly serious. In terms of how safe is the world, and if we are playing the long game, is this the worst you've seen it in the Middle East, and should we be worried?
You know, Kennedy, I think this is the first time that we are as close to an all-out war that brings America back into the Middle East. That's for certain. I think that if you look around the world in general, there are so many little fires going on at the moment, and any one of those could erupt and bring the whole world into it. And if you imagine, obviously, what's happening in the Middle East, and if you imagine that, we're seeing an exchange of rocket attacks, say, between Iran and Israel. Imagine if a U.S. embassy was hit. Imagine if a U.S. ship was hit. Anything like that, and this erupts into a much, much bigger war than we're currently seeing. I think when you ask about the long game, I think it is interesting. I think Israel is starting to look at a long game. For a long time, for decades, they've been dealing with Hamas. They've been dealing with Hezbollah. They've been dealing with the proxies out of Syria and Iraq. When all along they knew that the one group behind all of those was Iran. And what we are now finally seeing, I think, is Israel going to move quite heavily against Iran. That, in one sense, is a long game. It is no longer just knocking out the proxies that are attacking Israel. It is about trying to get rid of the root cause. The question is, how far does Israel plan to go? But I would say some people would say that that is a long-term solution. In the past, these conflicts have been, you knock Hamas down, you knock Hezbollah back, but not that far, and then they just rebuild themselves over the next 5 to 10 years, and then you do it again. This time does seem to be different. They really are trying to totally eradicate these terror groups.
Yes, the gloves came off for Israel on October 7th. A lot of politicians pay lip service, like the vice president, and say that Israel has the right to defend itself. Which actors in the Middle East have nuclear weapons, and at what point does the war escalate to where they actually use them? Is détente still an active force in global conflicts?
Well, I mean, in the Middle East, the only country with nuclear weapons is Israel. Iran, some people say, about perhaps as short as 5 weeks away from developing and building their own bombs, but they don't.
Is that good news, though?
In what way?
Détente.
No, I don't think so. I think that when you get a country that is a regime that is so,
emotional and theocratic.
Well, yes, and violent as the Iranians, then no, that's a real risk. I think that it is an essential time to try and hold Iran back from getting their bombs. Now, I said that they're close to being able to build bombs, but they are further away from being able to mount those bombs onto rockets that will be able to come back in, and also miniaturize them to fit on those rockets. So that's the question, is how long they're able to do that for. If we're talking about whether Israel will hit the Iranian nuclear sites, I think it's fair to say that they can't do that alone. They need US support to do that. Some of these deep nuclear sites like Taftanaz, they're so deep underground that even the bunker busters that Israeli forces and Air Force have wouldn't be enough. So I don't think we're going to see an attempt for them to go for their nuclear sites.
I mean, it doesn't seem like the U.S. would want to do that either, because wouldn't that open us up, like make us much more vulnerable to a bigger, more violent conflict that If we hit them as hard as it's going to take to paralyze their nuclear program, why wouldn't they just try and obliterate the eastern seaboard if they could?
Well, and I think that, Iran has played a long game in negotiations with the US, which is they made it quite clear that they will hold back from getting the bomb. If their sites were attacked, the widely held belief is that they would no longer hold back. They would go to build it. And look, if they did try and develop a bomb, which it might take another few more years, say, then you could almost certainly expect Saudi Arabia to do the same. In fact, there's long been talk of Pakistan and Saudi Arabia having a deal under the table by which, if the Saudis wanted a bomb, the Pakistanis would help them to build one quite quickly. So yes, once Iran moves towards a bomb, then other countries in the region will also move towards a bomb as well. Détente, nuclear device has not been used since the end of World War II. Is that because of détente, or is that because of the backlash against the civilian death toll when it comes to that? I don't know. I think that keeping the bomb out of Iran's hand is absolute a necessity.
Do you think that's the most important job for the next president?
Well, for the last decade or so, the Middle East has sort of been controlled itself. There are small little battles raging. I think that the US president, could allow that to happen over there, and he could focus on the economy. I think there's a real view for the next president that this couldn't necessarily be contained in the Middle East, that it could erupt. So it will be one of the first decisions and policies that they will have to take. Biden has been not as supportive of the Israelis as the Israelis would have liked. Kamala Harris is likely to be very similar. President Trump, on the other hand, would be full force behind Israel. And look, when we talk about what Israel's plans are for the next week, when it plans to go against Iran, it will be thinking of the effect on the US election. Netanyahu will be wanting to put Biden under an immense amount of pressure so that they perhaps don't win as many votes. So that will be playing into their mind as well, because yes, look, US policy right now is very much tied to what's happening in the Middle East.
Who are our allies in the Middle East outside of Israel? And are they still motivated by capitalism? Because you've seen a lot of talk where people are motivated by force and revenge. And some of that is understandable. There was a long time, I'm a philosophical libertarian, and obviously I would like to see peace. I would like to see prosperity. I would like to see people from every culture and every background leave a better life for their children, one that is even more prolific in peace and prosperity. But it seems like that worldview it almost feels a little bit outdated. And, the capitalism, the Abraham Accords, like if we just bring everyone to the table and everyone is a stakeholder in, this future post-oil success, will be a better world for it. But it feels like a lot of that has fallen by the wayside. Are there still countries in the Middle East who are driven by that desire for old school capitalistic success?
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about countries, you have to talk both about the leaders, the kings, as well as the people in the country. And so, look, the Abraham Accords was actually a really, I thought, pretty defining movement forward. I think that many countries, like Saudi, are embracing, an economic future. They want their country to move in that direction, but they also have to appease, and we'll use Saudi Arabia as an example, they also have to appease a vast majority of their people who are Wahhabi Sunni, who want a really strict version of Islam. And that was what people were watching about these countries, is when the leadership wants to go in one direction, but so many of the people perhaps do not, mainly because many of them are so uneducated as well. What happens in the future? And I think that, the question was, do we have allies in the region? Are there allies in the region? You could say Jordan, of course, is. But again, the leadership, perhaps, of some of these countries are great allies. But again, many of the people perhaps want the very death of America. And so, the Middle East works on two different levels. It works on the people who control it and the relationships that they have with the American government. And then it has the vast majority of the people who live in the Middle East who are fervently anti-American, frankly, and who want the abolition of Israel as well. So how do you really build this greater ideal of prosperous, economic prosperity in the future when you still have that going on? Now, what is behind that is many of the leaders of these countries, the Gulf states and the Saudi they don't want their people to be educated, because once you educate your people, then they want democracy. So these kings are in a tricky position
Yes.
because they want to move towards an economic, rich future, capitalist future, but they do not want to move towards a democratic future. And again, these countries are just torn between two different ideals, and that's what that's why it was uncertain about how it would play forward. I do think that you have also seen a clear sign that many of these countries don't have moved away from Gaza. This is before the conflict. Many of them would have happily the Abraham Accords. They had these great deals with Israel. They were moving forward, and actually, they weren't really standing up for the Gazans in Palestine anymore. They thought that that was holding back the region, and they were hoping for something else. October 7th has actually sadly brought them back into that. But
Hmm.
it was interesting to see the Saudis as well kind of turn a bit of a cold shoulder over the last 10 years to Palestine and to Gaza.
Don't go anywhere. More Kennedy Saves the World right after this.
Yes, I think you see a lot more fervent protesting at places like Columbia University than Riyadh, because and they all hope, it's like having a dysfunctional family. Like everyone hopes the dysfunctional family member just somehow magically gets it together. And,
Mm.
sometimes in families that doesn't happen. And, you can put your head in the sand, but the problem just grows and grows and grows. And it all gets forced to a head, which is where we are now. But if you look outside the Middle East, a lot of people, they like to oversimplify some of these alliances. And, we like to imagine that China and Iran and Russia, like they're in this super tight bro alliance, and they like Zoom each other and laugh about American politics and, dream of all the places that they're going to mow over, and, the enemies that are going to obliterate, and the land they're going to amass like retro colonialists. Is it really that simple? Is it really um, Iran, China, and Russia are somehow in an alliance, and the rest of us are, just got to hope for the best?
It's not quite that simple, but I think that that is a pretty accurate portrayal, to be honest. I really do think that one of the key goals, shared goals of all these countries, to bring down the dollar as international currency. It's to bring down the power of America around the world, and they were very happy to see their colleagues, the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, however they can collectively help to destabilize the world and to destabilize and reduce American power. They are happy to do that. So I do think there is this case where these countries are coming together, because the one country that has tried to keep them in their place has been America. So they have that one shared belief that if they can bring down America, and what they've learned is it doesn't have to necessarily be because by a war. I mean, they are inside so many cities and social media, just looking at where divisions are taking place. And they go in there, and Russia is an expert at it. They are trying on so many levels, both on the social media, level, to create divisions and create those, just in the same sense that Russia is interested in taking Ukraine. They are working on many levels altogether to try and destabilize the world and to bring down the American power. So no, I would say that the axis of evil, if you were to call it that today, very much does exist. Now, I would also say, for example, that China does not want, say, a World War III. They understand that they want Russia to sort of destabilize the US. They want Russia to bring US focus towards Ukraine, but they don't want it to escalate to a higher level. They don't want the Russians using a nuclear bomb, for example. So China can use Russia. It's happy what Russia is doing, but doesn't want Russia to go too far. And so there are nuances to their relationship. But look at the weapons that are trading between these countries as well.
Mm.
I mean, they really are, keeping each other up. They're helping each other break sanctions. They're buying each other's oil and gas. So no, there is definitely sort of a network there that is trying to move without American control.
Yeah, and when you talk about the kingdoms in the Middle East, it reminds me of China, because China has wanted that prosperity without the silly democracy. And I think, of all the systems on the planet, like that is the ideal. If you only want to go so far appeasing your people and you want to stay in power. China has figured out that system. I hope that is not a contagion. I hope that we don't catch it in the West and certainly not in America. I like freedom of movement. I like not having a social credit score. I like not rounding up ethnic minorities and putting them in death camps. I really, again, I'm nostalgic for freedom, and unfortunately, I think that that is like capitalism. It's kind of going out of style. How do we
I
bring it
think we
back?
take it, yeah, and I think we take it, we forget just for how short a time there has been effective world peace, that there has been the great boom in the economies, you know. But if you go back 100 years, you know, we were at the end of thousands of years of battle,
Hmm.
you know, and so just to think that we've somehow sorted it, or that these dictatorships or these countries or this desire for more and for control, that hasn't disappeared. The morals that once drove that, they still exist. We're a couple generations down. I think we've got to remind all our children um, at how far we've come and how easy it is to lose all that. But it's very easy. It's hard to build up. It's very easy to tear it all down.
Yes, it's like a credit card.
Mhm.
It's real easy to ring it up, very difficult to pay down. And I'm glad you brought that up because I remind my girls, it's like I am one generation removed from basically agrarian peasants. It's like
Mm,
my mom came over from Romania, and when my daughters are having a hard time, I just try and remind them what life was like for their grandmother and their great grandparents, whom they knew my grandmother, and they knew those stories, but it's hard to internalize them when you've got that kind of rapid progress. It's very, very easy within a generation to completely lose that perspective because your
yeah.
context has shifted so much and we take so much for granted, and we want change even faster. We get addicted to that fast change. But as you're describing these wars and these personalities, it's so fascinating. Like, there's a reason that Shakespeare is so prescient, and that's because human nature doesn't change. It really
Mm,
doesn't change. Like, people are bullies, people are narcissists, people are needy, people are vengeful, but we have to also remember that people are very, very good, and people are loving, and people are protective. And I constantly go back to your story and what it took for you to survive, and the people that you were able to rely on because of that inherent goodness that is still there. And I hope and I pray that that is still very much in all of these cultures and all of these conflicts, that somehow that is still the overriding force.
no, I believe 100% that it is. And look, I often say, look, one terrible thing happened to me and it happened to our team. Um, but that was one terrible thing. And I can tell you 1,000 amazing things that happened after that. The people who came to help me, support me, save me, the people who were there to care for my family, the people who were there to, pick up the pieces when they needed. I went through all of that, and for the year afterwards, being so amazed at how much good there was, not at the bad that I'd seen. And I think that's something we have to keep talking about. And look, I think I don't think it's an easy one to point your finger at, but I think that we are moving into a generation of social media whereby people are just totally losing track of what reality is. And it is created for them on a tablet, on their phone, and we are losing the sense of what relations should be based on,
Mm.
and what the ups and downs of life are totally normal. And we are trying to our kids think we live in this world where everything should be perfect, and that's a mistake as well.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, I think that what happened to me woke me up, and I think that the message that I keep trying to send to everyone is that there's so much more positive good in the world than there is bad, and we should all focus on that
Yeah.
constantly.
And it's Searching for Heroes, your podcast. You do such an amazing job of telling those stories, finding people that, history modern times that we're living in would overlook. But there's nothing more miraculous than looking in the face of your child and knowing that so much good is possible and your family has expanded. We learned that this morning on Fox and Friends.
Yeah, that's right. We had a baby girl. She's called Sage, just a few weeks ago. And look, I mean, there's absolute joy in having a new baby. But I suppose I've also felt over the last few years since Ukraine that it doesn't matter if you're knocked down. It doesn't matter if things become difficult. That there is a future ahead of us that we are responsible for, that we can provide for, that we have to encourage. And honestly, when I held this baby, when I held Sage for the first time, that's what I felt. I felt that, look, I've covered conflicts for 15 years and I've talked about the horrors going on in the world. Well, I said, you know what I want to focus on moving forward as well? I want to keep reminding people that there's so much good out there, and we've got to focus on that as well. Keep reminding ourselves of that. So, look, this is my fourth daughter, and it just feels like she was always meant to be with us. And it's in a way, I suppose my other three maybe didn't. I feel more motivated than ever to go out and try and create a better world for her. And I know that sounds like a cliche to say, but I genuinely believe it. I genuinely believe that if we all do our best, we all go and try and help someone, one person every day, do a little something, we create a stronger community, we create a better place, and we've got to focus on that.
Yes, and I thank God that you are in this world. I'm so happy for your family. Continued love and blessings to all of them, especially baby Sage. Benjamin, I know you're so busy and I really appreciate you taking the time because you are one of the few people that can literally answer a question about anything. And we are so much better off for having the conversation. So thanks again.
Oh, it's my pleasure always, Kennedy. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. This has been Kennedy Saves the World along with Benjamin Hall. I'm Kennedy.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.
Oh, go ahead and leave me a review while you're there. I'd love to hear what you have to say. You've been listening to Kennedy Saves the World on the Fox News Podcast Network.